Hey everyone, I'm MR.Creepy. From today, we're starting a brand new series, real-life terrifying encounters from the Appalachian Mountains. If you're new here, hit like and subscribe before we begin. It helps the channel a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Before we start, drop in comments. Where are you watching from and what's the time there? What stories do you want next? More mountain encounters, haunted houses, road horrors, or sleep paralysis? Alright, let's get into tonight's encounter. I need you to understand something before I tell you this story. I am not someone who scares easily. I spent 3 years doing land surveys in remote areas. Just me, my equipment, and whatever wilderness I was dropped into. I've slept alone in places most people won't even drive through. I don't panic. I don't imagine things. And I don't tell this story often, because every time I do, I spend the next few nights listening to sounds I know aren't there. But they were there. I know they were. The cabin belonged to my old college professor, Dr. Raymond Holt. He'd used it every summer for 15 years and swore nothing had ever gone wrong. Rustic but functional. That's exactly how he described it. No running water, no electricity, no cell signal, no neighbors for miles. Just a hollow carved into the Appalachian Mountains past Harlan County, where the trees grew so thick they blocked out half the sky, even in winter. I was 26. I'd just lost my surveying job and needed to get away from everything. People, noise, the city, all of it. When Dr. Holt offered me the cabin for the winter. Just keep an eye on it. Make sure the pipes don't freeze. I loaded my truck and drove until the paved road disappeared behind me. The first 3 days felt like a gift. I spit firewood every morning until my shoulders ached. I melted snow on the stove for water. I read by lantern light until my eyes couldn't stay open. The cold outside was brutal, but inside with the wood stove going and the amber light filling the small rooms, I felt more at peace than I had in years. It was exactly what I needed. Then, on day 3, I looked out the front window at the hill behind the cabin, and something was wrong. Nothing dramatic, just the slope. It looked steeper than the day before, a degree or 2 off from what I remembered. I set my coffee down and stared at it. Snow shifts overnight, I told myself. Gravity moves things slowly. I opened the window and looked directly at it. Just trees. Just white. I let it go. That was my first mistake. The cabin layout was easy to memorize. Main room with the wood stove. Small kitchen to the right. A short hallway leading back to the single bedroom. And above that hallway, nailed shut, painted over, thick with dust, was an attic hatch. No ladder. No handle. It looked like it hadn't been touched since the 1970s. I glanced at it once and forgot about it, until I couldn't anymore. On the 4th night, I walked toward the bedroom and stopped cold. The lantern light, which always fell the same way across the hallway floor, was hitting the boards at a wrong angle, like the floor had tilted slightly, and the bedroom door looked further away than it should have been. 3 feet further, easy. I walked the hall, opened the door, found a perfectly normal room, went back to get my book from the chair by the stove. It was gone. I found it on the bed, open, laid flat on a chapter I hadn't reached yet. I am not a careless person. When you work alone in the field, you always know where your things are. Always. But I also hadn't slept well, and I was alone, and a mind to strange things in silence. I told myself that. I went to sleep. The next morning destroyed that excuse completely. Outside the kitchen window, the snowbank had a channel cut through it, long, smooth, and curved, running from the base of the cabin wall all the way out to the tree line. No footprints, no animal marks, just a clean path, like something heavy had been pulled from inside the cabin, out into the dark woods overnight. I stood in the cold and stared at it for 10 minutes. I tried every explanation I could think of. None of them held up. That afternoon, just to settle my mind, I counted my steps down the hallway, 8.5 paces from the kitchen to the bedroom door. I wrote it down. Before bed, I counted again, 10 steps. Same boots, same stride, same floor. I walked it 4 more times, 10 every single time. I went outside for air and looked at my own boot prints in the snow. The path curved, just slightly, a few degrees to the right. But I had walked in a perfectly straight line. Straight lines were my job for 3 years. My tracks curved like the cabin itself had quietly rotated while my back was turned. I stopped sleeping after that. 2 nights later, just after midnight, I heard it. A slow, heavy dragging sound from above the hallway ceiling, like something shifting its weight across wood. Deliberate, patient. I pulled a chair under the hatch, set the lantern on the floor, laid the axe across my lap, and watched that hatch for a full hour. Nothing moved. But when I stood up and went to the bedroom, the door was wide open. I always keep it closed. The window was cracked just enough for cold air to slip through, and a thin line of snow had settled on the sill. I jammed a chair under the door handle and didn't move it until morning. Later that night, I found the floorboards near the front door. Same wood as the rest, but the nails were silver and new, sitting bright among nails that had been rusting for decades. I had fixed nothing. I had touched nothing. My duffel bag was half unzipped. 1 glove was missing. I found it at the base of the back window, fingers spread open, pressed flat against the glass, like a small hand pushing through from the other side. I lit every lantern I had, sat in the middle of the room with the axe in my hands, and didn't move. At 4 in the morning, the sound came back from above the hallway, but this time it wasn't dragging, it was breathing, slow, deep, heavy, real, coming from directly above the hatch that had been nailed shut since before I was born. I did not look up. I packed my bag 1 item at a time, keeping my eyes locked on that hatch, never turning my back to the hallway. Then I walked out the front door into the black cold, and I did not look back. The tree line looked closer than it should have. The road I'd driven in on was gone, just smooth, unbroken snow where my tire tracks used to be. I picked a direction and walked. For 6 hours, face completely numb, legs shaking with every step, running on nothing but the need to get away from that cabin. When the gas station on Route 160 finally came into view, I nearly dropped to my knees. I used their phone to call Dr. Holt, told him I was done. The key was under the mat. I wouldn't be going back. He listened to the whole thing in silence. Then he said, quietly, calmly, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world, "Okay." No questions, no concern, just okay. 2 weeks later, I found out the cabin had burned to the ground. They said it was an electrical fire, faulty wiring. Raymond Holt's cabin never had electricity. I've been back to those mountains once since then, broad daylight, middle of summer, 4 other people in the car. I watched the tree line the whole drive, and didn't relax until we were far below the ridge. Some places aren't meant to be understood. They're only meant to be left alone, and if you stay too long, they will teach you that lesson themselves, one quiet, impossible detail at a time, until the only thought left in your head is run. Let me tell you something about the moment you realize your child can see something you can't. It doesn't hit you all at once. It creeps in slow, one small detail at a time, until the morning comes when you can't explain it away anymore, and the only thing left to do is run. My name is Dana. 2 winters ago, I packed everything my 7-year-old son and I owned into the back of a Jeep and drove deep into the Appalachian Mountains, looking for quiet. What I found instead has never fully left me. The divorce had been ugly in ways I still don't have clean words for. My son Noah had stopped sleeping. Completely. He'd lie in his bed every night with his eyes wide open, clutching that old stuffed lizard he'd carried since he was 3, completely still, like he was bracing for the next bad thing to happen. His school counselor said he needed distance from stress at home. What she meant was, your son is drowning in the tension between you and his father, and if you don't get him out, it's going to leave a mark that doesn't heal easily. So I found a cabin online. Cheap rent. 3 months paid up front, a landlord who never answered calls and barely replied to emails. I didn't ask questions. I loaded the Jeep and drove us north as the first real snow of the season started coming down, telling myself it was a fresh start. The cabin sat 40 minutes past a half-dead mining town called Hallowick at the end of a mountain road that twisted so hard through the trees your ears popped on every other curve. It was not what the listing photos had suggested. Coal stove, pantry crammed with canned food that had expired years ago, a damp, sour smell in the walls that no amount of heat could chase out. The The radio only worked if you balanced it on the windowsill at a very specific angle. No cell service, no internet, just snow, cold, and silence so deep it had weight to it. I told myself that was exactly what we needed. The first 2 days, Noah barely spoke, but he slept, long and heavy and real, curled up around that lizard, completely gone. I sat beside his bed, both nights just watching him breathe, feeling something wound tight inside my chest finally start to loosen. I thought we were going to be okay. Then, on the third morning, over a plate of pancakes, he looked out the kitchen window and said completely casually, "Mom, why does that lady by the stump always watch us?" I set my fork down slowly. There was a tree stump, maybe 20 feet from the porch, old dead spruce, half buried in snow, with a covered well sitting a few feet beside it. I had looked at that stump every single morning. There was nothing near it, nothing at all. "What lady, Bud?" I asked, keeping my voice as even as I could. He didn't look at me, just pointed toward the window with his fork. "She wears dark gloves. Her hair looks frozen." I stared out that window for a long time. Snow, stump, tree line pressing close in the gray morning light. Nothing else. I told him it was probably just frost on the bark making shapes. He shrugged and went back to eating like he'd already lost interest in the conversation. But that night, stepping outside to grab coal from the shed, I stopped dead on the bottom porch step. Footprints in the snow, one set, coming from the tree line behind the cabin, ending directly at the stump. Not going back, just stopping there, like whoever made them had walked straight out of the dark woods, stood at that stump, and simply ceased to exist. I stood in the cold staring at those prints for a long time. Then I went back inside and didn't say a word to Noah. That same night he refused to sleep in the loft, said the floorboards up there didn't creak. They whispered. I didn't argue. I put him in the main room bed and climbed up to the loft myself. Around 2 in the morning, I heard footsteps downstairs, slow and even, moving behind the coal stove. 3 steps, a pause, 3 more, too steady and deliberate for a house settling in the cold. I leaned over the railing with the lantern. Nothing there. The next morning, Noah slid his notebook across the breakfast table without saying anything. He'd drawn a face, rough, fast lines, like he was drawing quickly and didn't want to look at the page any longer than necessary. Wide, pale eyes that didn't blink, a mouth pulled too tight, not angry, just deeply, fundamentally wrong. Below it, in his small, careful handwriting, he'd written, "The Snow Lady." He looked up at me and said, "She hums when you sleep." I waited until he went outside to play in the snow. Then I tore the page out and burned it in the stove. Irrational. I knew that. I didn't care. It was the only thing I could think to do. 3 nights later, I heard it myself, low and faint, drifting from somewhere inside the walls, like someone humming softly to themselves, just on the other side of the wood. Almost a lullaby, but slightly off, like a song you half recognize played just a little out of tune. The moment I sat up in bed, it stopped. I searched the entire cabin, every corner, every closet, under every piece of furniture. Nothing. But when I came back to the hallway, Noah was sitting cross-legged on the floor, wrapped in his blanket, swaying gently back and forth. He looked up at me with calm, sleepy eyes and said, "She's in the well now." We hadn't gone near the well since we arrived. It had a heavy iron lid held down with a thick chain and a padlock. The next morning, I walked out and found the chain coiled neatly in the snow beside the stump, set down carefully, like someone had taken their time unwinding it. The lid was still in place, but around its entire edge, in one unbroken, perfect circle, something had scraped through the frost, slow and even, like fingernails that really, really wanted inside. After that, the knocking started, always around 3 in the morning, first from under the floorboards, quiet enough to explain away as pipes or wood contracting in the cold, then harder, sharper. Some nights it came fast and jittery like impatient fingers drumming. Other nights it came slow and deliberate, like something that knew you were wide awake and wasn't in any rush at all. One night it moved to the wall, directly behind where my head rested on the pillow. Noah had already moved into my room by then. He just appeared in the doorway one night with his lizard tucked under his arm and climbed in beside me without a single word. That same night, he pressed close against my side and whispered, "Don't open your eyes if she says your name." I went ice cold from the inside out. 2 nights before that, I had heard my name spoken outside the bedroom window, soft and slow, like someone turning it over carefully in their mouth, twice. Then a silence that stretched so long I'd started to breathe again. Then one final whisper, barely sound at all. "Let me in, Dana." Nobody in those mountains knew my name. I had given the landlord nothing but my initials on the rental form. The ice storm hit 4 days later. Power out, just candles and the coal stove and the 2 of us buried under every blanket I owned. I dragged the dresser against the front door, locked every window. I was completely done pretending we were fine. Just past midnight, Noah sat straight up beside me and said quietly, "She brought someone with her." Before I could say a single word, the pantry door began to open. We hadn't touched that room in 2 weeks, just dead cold storage with broken shelves and old cans. But the door swung wide on its own, slow and groaning the whole way. Then came the sound, not footsteps, something lower and heavier, limbs dragging across the floorboards, moving wrong, like elbows and knees bending in directions they weren't built to bend. I grabbed the fire poker, pulled Noah tight behind me, and moved toward the doorway. The pantry was completely black inside, but something in that darkness was breathing, deep and slow and patient. Not scared, not rushed, just waiting. Then the smell rolled out and hit me like a wall. Cold dirt, wet wool. Something underneath it, sickly sweet, like fruit that had frozen solid and was rotting from the inside out. I slammed the door shut and jammed a chair under the handle. We sat in the kitchen without speaking until the sky started to lighten, just listening to whatever was on the other side of that door shift its weight every now and then, slow and unhurried, like it had nowhere else to be. At first light I went to load the car. The frost had built up on the inside of the windshield, not the outside, the inside, and drawn through it with one slow finger, in wide uneven letters, was a single word, "Stay." I didn't. I threw everything into the trunk, buckled Noah into his seat, and drove. We skidded and slid down that mountain road until the trees thinned and the curves straightened and the world started looking like a place people actually lived. I didn't stop until we were nearly in Knoxville. I never called the landlord, never asked for the deposit, never told anyone the full story until right now. Noah is doing well. New school, new friends, sleeps through the night without a single problem. He never mentions that winter. He hasn't drawn anything, not one single picture, since the day we left. I've never asked him why. Some answers, I've decided, are better left up in those mountains where we found them, in the dark behind a locked door, waiting for someone foolish enough to go back. My name is Cole. I was 19, freshly dropped out of college, and not particularly welcome back in Ohio. My Uncle Darren had a cabin he'd built himself out in a deep hollow, one floor sagging slightly on the left side, heated by a wood stove and lit by lanterns and one kitchen bulb that worked when it felt like it. He needed help clearing an old ATV trail that the forest had swallowed up over the years. I needed somewhere to be that wasn't my parents' living room. It was a simple arrangement. The days had a rhythm I actually liked. Wake up, stoke the fire, brew instant coffee on the stove, hike up the trail with a machete and a roll of red flagging tape. The forest was dense pine, packed close, with hidden rocks that caught your boots when you weren't paying attention. I'd spend hours hacking back brush and tying tape to tree trunks to mark where the old trail used to run. Slow work, but honest. The kind that empties your head. There was one stretch I never liked, though. A section running along a steep ridge where the ground turned to loose shale that shifted and slid under every step. The other side of that ridge dropped hard. Not a sheer cliff, but steep enough that a bad slip would mean rolling a long way before you stopped. I stayed away from that part unless I had absolutely no choice. The first 4 nights were cold and quiet and fine. Canned chili on the stove. Old DVDs on a laptop. Asleep by 9, the wood stove kept the cabin warm enough, and I slept like I hadn't slept in months. I was actually starting to think this was exactly what I needed. Then came the 5th night. I woke up just after 2 in the morning with no idea why. No sound, no nightmare, just this sudden pressure, like the air in the room had quietly changed while I was sleeping. My ears felt stuffed and my chest felt tight, like I'd been holding my breath without knowing it. I sat straight up, flannel sheets damp with sweat, and just listened. The windows were trembling, small, steady vibrations, but there was no wind outside, not even a breeze moving through the pines. The trees were completely still. Then something hit the roof, a single heavy thud, solid and sharp. Not snow sliding, not a branch dropping. The impact of real weight dropping from a real height and landing hard. I grabbed the iron fire poker from beside the stove before I was fully awake and pressed myself against the front door, ear flat to the wood, hot hammering. Nothing. No follow-up sound. No footsteps crossing the roof. No shifting. Just that same thick, stuffed silence pressing back against the door from the other side. I eventually backed away and climbed into bed. I didn't sleep. I just lay there watching the ceiling and waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. Not that night. In the morning, I went out to split wood and stopped when I saw the roof. The snow up there was fresh and undisturbed, except for one long curved depression near the center, maybe 6 or 7 feet across, like something had slid slowly down the pitch and stopped. The morning sun was catching it at just the right angle. Otherwise I would have walked right past it. No branches nearby that could have fallen. No footprints anywhere around the cabin. Just that shape pressed into the snow, too deliberate and too long to be anything the wind made. I split my wood and went back inside and tried hard not to think about it. A few nights later, it happened again. Same time, 2 in the morning. Almost exact, but this time it wasn't a thud. It was a crash that shook the walls. I felt it in my spine and in my back teeth simultaneously. I was off the bed and out the front door in seconds, barefoot, lantern in hand, half asleep and fully panicked. The porch boards were ice under my feet. I stood there in the dark staring at the tree line and there was absolutely nothing. No movement, no disturbed snow, no broken branches. Just the woods standing completely still in a silence that felt wrong, too total, too deliberate, like every living thing out there had stopped at exactly the same moment. I looked toward the ridge where the old quarry used to be. Government land now, fenced, posted with warning signs that most locals ignored. I'd never gone up there, and it wasn't because of the signs. The place just felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Like the air near it was slightly different. Like even sound behaved differently up there. After that second crash, sleep became something I negotiated with rather than just fell into. During the days, something else started bothering me. Every morning when I hiked back to the trail, the flagging tape had been moved, not blown off or torn down, moved. Markers gone from where I tied them, doubled up in places I hadn't touched. I figured I was getting turned around at first, tired and losing track, so I started photographing every marker before I hiked down each evening. Came back the next morning, still different. On the 10th day, I found 3 flags tied together in a perfect spiral, laid flat in the center of the old quarry access road, a stretch where I had placed nothing, not dropped, not tangled by wind, tied, neat and deliberate, sitting in the snow like someone had set them there specifically for me to find. No tracks in the snow around them, no disturbance in any direction, just that tight little coil waiting in the middle of the road like a message I didn't know how to read. I turned around and walked back to the cabin without touching them. That night, the sound came from underneath, a low grinding rumble that built slowly from below the floorboards, deep and heavy like something massive shifting its weight beneath the foundation. It lasted 8 or 9 full seconds, long enough for the dishes in the cupboard to rattle, long enough for the stovepipe to shake in its brackets, long enough for me to sit completely frozen with a blanket around my shoulders, unable to do anything but breathe through it and wait for it to stop. When it did stop, the silence was the worst part, total and immediate, like the whole mountain had cut itself off from sound at once. I turned off every light and sat in the corner with the blanket pulled over my head. I know exactly how that sounds. I don't care. Something in my gut told me very clearly that I did not want to see whatever was out there if it decided to come closer. Some instincts don't explain themselves, they just insist. That night I dreamed I was packed in frozen dirt, couldn't move any part of my body. My mouth was full of gravel, and I could feel my teeth fracturing one by one in the cold. I woke up gagging and sat on the edge of the bed until the room stopped spinning. Out back, in the snow, 2 deep parallel grooves ran from beneath the cabin wall into the tree line. Not claw marks, not boot prints. 2 clean channels in the snow, side by side, like something heavy had been dragged backward into the woods. I stopped going outside after dark after that. I kept the fire burning low and tried to ignore the sounds that started coming from the direction of the ridge at night. Deep, sharp pops like distant gunshots, but heavier. The kind of sound that you feel in your sternum before you hear it with your ears. I told myself it was the cold working on the trees. Trees make sounds in winter. That's a real thing. I told myself that several times. Then one night, sitting in front of a DVD I'd stopped actually watching, the cabin filled with a roar. Not a crash, not a thud. A sustained, wall-shaking roar, like a jet engine hovering 6 inches above the roof and pressing down with everything it had. I ran to the window and yanked the curtain back, expecting to see the trees torn apart or something burning. The woods were perfectly still, snow on every branch, nothing moving, nothing on fire, no shadow, no shape, nothing. The sound didn't fade the way sounds do. It just stopped. One hard cut to silence, like someone had reached over and turned it off. The power blinked once and went out. I sat beside the wood stove in the dark, watching the orange glow move across the walls, and made myself a very simple promise. In the morning, I was leaving, and I did. I packed what mattered, hiked down to the main road, and found a payphone at a gas station 2 miles out. Called Uncle Darren and told him the trail would have to wait. He asked if everything was okay. I told him the cabin was fine, the trail work was going well, and that I just needed to come home. I don't know why I lied. Maybe because I knew that whatever I'd heard up there in that hollow, whatever moved flags and left marks in snow and shook foundations at 2 in the morning, it didn't have an explanation that fit neatly into a phone call. Some things you carry quietly because the only alternative is saying them out loud and watching people's faces go careful and polite. I've never gone back. Uncle Darren still uses the cabin every summer. I've never asked him if anything strange has happened there. I don't want to know the answer. My Uncle Garrett built his cabin near the Kentucky-Virginia border with his own hands back in the 80s. 1 floor, slightly tilted on the left side, heated by a wood stove and lit mostly by lanterns. He used it for hunting trips and long weekends alone. The kind of man who needed space the way other people need conversation. He died the previous spring. Heart attack, no warning, no goodbye. He didn't have children, and the cabin had been sitting locked and dark since the funeral. My mom asked if I could drive out the week before Thanksgiving, take stock of what was inside, and box up anything worth keeping before the ridge froze over for winter. Simple job, a few days at most. I took time off work, packed some sweaters, grabbed a flashlight, and drove out telling myself it was just an errand. The last sign of civilization on that drive is a gas station with 1 pump and coffee that tastes like it was brewed sometime last decade. Cell signal drops out about 30 minutes before you arrive. The mailboxes along the gravel road all lean at wrong angles, like they've slowly been giving up over the years. I remembered all of it from when I was a kid. Garrett used to bring us up twice a year. Long weekends full of trail hikes and wood smoke. Coming back alone felt like reading a book with the last chapter torn out. I beat the second snowstorm by exactly 1 day. The first 2 nights were quiet and almost peaceful. I stayed on the main floor, didn't touch the attic hatch, got the wood stove going and worked steadily through the closets. Mostly old gear, thermal socks, park ranger manuals, trail maps with Garrett's handwriting penciled into the margins. Snow fell soft and steady outside, and by morning everything beyond the windows looked completely erased. just white in every direction. I felt more settled than I had any right to feel. That lasted until the third day. I'd hauled a couple of trash bags down to the roadside bin, 50 yards from the porch. Easy walk. I'd already stomped a rough path through the snow earlier that morning. On my way back, I glanced toward the tree line out of pure habit. Someone was standing there, perfectly still at the edge of the woods, maybe 30 yards out, not moving, not looking around, arms at his sides, facing the cabin directly. He wore a long dark coat and plain jeans. No hat, no gloves, no scarf, nothing that made any sense for the temperature. My first thought was neighbor, but they weren't really neighbors up here. The closest property sat half a mile down the ridge, and every cabin along that stretch had been shuttered since October. I raised my hand in a slow, uncertain wave, just to see what he'd do. Nothing. He didn't nod, didn't shift his weight, didn't acknowledge me in any way, just stood there, like he had been standing there for a very long time and intended to keep standing there. I walked back to the cabin slower than I'd walked out. I checked over my shoulder every few steps. Every single time I looked, he was still in the same position, same coat, same stillness, same direct stare at the porch. I stepped inside, closed the door, and locked it, quietly, not in a panic, just a soft, deliberate click. Then I pulled a kitchen chair over and wedged it under the door handle. I didn't have a reason I could explain out loud. It just felt necessary. I sorted boxes for the rest of the afternoon and checked the window every 20 minutes. He was there every time, until dusk came and I looked out and the tree line was empty again. Just snow and pine and the gray light fading behind the ridge. That night I slept on the couch near the fire, told myself it was just easier than heating the whole cabin. But every creak of the porch in the wind brought me straight upright. I kept listening for footsteps, for the sound of weight settling onto frozen ground. I caught myself holding my breath so many times I lost track. Morning came pale and still. I walked the tree line and checked the snow carefully. Animal tracks here and there, drifting in a few spots, but nothing shaped like boots, nothing human in any direction. I stood out there in the cold and told myself I had imagined the whole thing. 2 days later, I stepped outside just past noon to beat out an old rug I'd found rolled up behind the sofa. I carried it to the porch rail, gave it a few hard whacks, and glanced toward the back shed. He was there, closer this time, standing just behind the stacked firewood along the shed wall. Not hiding, not crouching, standing fully upright in plain sight, staring directly at the porch like he belonged there, like he had always been there, and I was the one who had arrived uninvited. I didn't wave. I backed up slowly, stepped inside without turning around, and locked the door. Then I sat on the floor with my back against the wall and pulled the curtain back 1 inch. He didn't move once the entire time I watched, didn't shift his weight, didn't look away. When the light finally failed and I checked one last time, he was gone. And I couldn't tell you exactly when because I had stopped being able to look for more than a few seconds at a stretch. That night, I shut every curtain in the cabin, left the porch light burning, turned the radio on low just to fill the air with something that sounded human. I tried to read and couldn't get through a single paragraph. At 2 in the morning, footsteps crossed the porch, slow and deliberate, one board at a time, like whoever it was knew exactly where to step. I lay completely still under the blanket, heart so loud in my ears, I was certain it could be heard through the walls. The steps stopped directly outside the living room window. I stared at the ceiling and did not breathe for what felt like a full minute. Then they started again, moving around the corner toward the side of the house, fading out slowly. I did not sleep after that. I just watched the curtains and waited for the sky behind them to turn gray. When morning came, I checked the porch immediately. A thin, fresh layer of snow had fallen overnight, smooth and unbroken across every single board. No prints, no mark of any kind, nothing that suggested anything had been there at all. I called my mom and told her I'd head out a day early. She said that was fine. I didn't mention the man. I didn't have the right words, and I didn't want to hear my own voice saying it out loud. The last night I gave up pretending I was calm. Fire burning hard, radio on low. Every light in the cabin switched on. Around midnight the landline rang. I had plugged it in early in the week just to check if it worked, and then completely forgotten about it. It rang twice. I picked it up. No voice, just breathing, slow and steady, and right at the edge of sound. Quiet enough that for a half second I thought I was inventing it, but not quiet enough to dismiss. I hung up, yanked the cord from the wall, and put the whole phone in a kitchen drawer. 15 minutes later, the porch light went out. No flicker, no warning, just gone, like someone had simply decided it was time. I sat on the couch without moving, listening to the wind find the gaps in the window frames. About an hour later came a single knock at the front door, soft and unhurried, like someone tapping with the back of their hand, patient, like they had knocked before and were confident they could wait. I did not go near it. I did not speak. I sat perfectly still until the curtains started showing grey light at their edges. I packed fast that morning, threw things into bags without caring what went where, left behind anything I hadn't already boxed. When I carried the last load out to the car, I made the mistake of looking toward the woods one final time. He was there. Same spot, same stillness, but the morning light was clear, and I was close enough that I saw what I had missed before. The coat wasn't dark brown, the way I'd assumed from a distance. It was faded military green, that specific worn-out shade that Garrett wore every single time he did Firewatch patrol on the ridge. I had a photograph of him in that exact coat pinned to my parents' fridge at home, and his face. It was almost Garrett's face. Almost like someone who had studied a single photograph of him and tried to rebuild the face from the outside in slightly wrong in every feature. Too soft around the jaw, eyes set just a little too close together. Every proportion just far enough off that looking at it felt deeply, physically wrong. Like something that understood what a human face was supposed to be, but had only ever seen one from a distance. I did not lock the cabin, did not check the mailbox, did not look back a second time. I drove straight down that mountain and kept driving until the road widened and the trees pulled back and there were other cars around me and gas stations with people standing in parking lots just living their ordinary, unremarkable lives. I never went back. My mum eventually hired someone else to finish clearing the cabin out. I told her I'd run out of time. She didn't push it. I don't stay in remote places alone anymore. Not cabins, not campsites. Nowhere that's far enough out that no one knows I'm supposed to be there. Some people think that's irrational. Maybe it is. But once you stood in a snowy driveway and looked at a dead man's face on something that is not a dead man, the word irrational loses most of its meaning. Some things in those deep mountain hollows don't follow the rules the rest of the world runs on. The best thing you can do, the only thing really, is get back in your car before they decide you've seen enough.